Hello, this is Mrs. Brown from Research Triangle High School. The purpose of this presentation is to give you some background on the novel Ellen Foster and on its author, Kay Gibbons. So we're going to start off with a little bit of information about Kay Gibbons. First of all, she is a North Carolinian. She was actually raised in Nash County, born over towards Rocky Mount, and grew up here, had some interesting things with her family, and then went to NC State and UNC Chapel Hill before writing her first novel, Ellen Foster, at the age of 26. Now, as a kid, when she was growing up in Rocky Mount, she had kind of a tough life. Her father was an alcoholic who eventually died of that, and her mother ended up committing suicide when Kay Gibbons was only about 10 years old. So if you can imagine growing up in that kind of scenario in this very poverty-stricken town, and she was born in 1960, so we're looking at the late 60s, early 70s there. And we're going to talk a little bit about some other things in her life that also affected her writing. But she is a native North Carolinian author, and a lot of what she writes about are the things that she experienced growing up here in North Carolina. After graduating from college and writing this great book, she got married to Michael Gibbons in 1984, and they had 3 daughters together. And then in 1992, they moved to California, and as things happened, it just kind of didn't really work out, and the marriage kind of fell apart. She ended up moving back here. She married another man named Frank Ward in 1993, but a lot of her life has been influenced by the fact that she suffers from something known as bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is sometimes known as manic depressive. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain that leads people into these depressive states where they can't get out of bed and nothing seems worth doing or worth living for anymore. They just don't understand how to go on. Or these manic states where they feel like they have all of this energy and they could just conquer the world and climb towers and do all these things, and they'll stay up for long periods of time and have these huge bursts of energy, and it goes back and forth between those. And she's actually been in and out and had different treatment programs and had a lot of trouble trying to manage this. And in 2009, relatively recently, she actually ended up having to plead guilty to fraud related to getting RX pain medicine that she was using to kind of help medicate a little bit with some of the symptoms that she experienced. She describes often doing writing during the manic state, that actually when she was in college, she wrote an entire novel and then ended up in the depressive state burning the whole thing and saying, this is worthless, it's not going on. So this manic state is sort of part of what influenced her writing. And today you can find her, she's a very popular speaker at local high schools and other types of programs where she talks about managing some of these issues related to mental health and related to prescription drug addiction, and obviously to her writing as well. Now, the novel we're going to be reading is Ellen Foster, and this was first published in 1987, and it's fairly autobiographical. It actually follows a story kind of similar to the same sorts of things that Kay Gibbons herself experienced in her family, and then asks that magical question that writers ask, what if? So what if this had happened to me? So we follow the story of this 11-year-old girl, and you're going to learn that the mother had a kind of a drug overdose that may or may not have been a suicide, that the father is a drunk and he actually abuses Ellen, and that Ellen's extended family is no help at all. And it today remains, out of all of the books that Kay Gibbons wrote, her most known and most awarded, or most award-winning, most decorated novel. Now, speaking of awards, Ellen Foster has won a ton of them. It was an Oprah Book Club book. That's not necessarily an award, but it certainly got the novel out there into a lot of public attention. It won the Sue Kaufman Prize, which was a novel thing that's given for novels. It got a special citation from the Ernest Hemingway Foundation. It was named one of the 20 greatest novels of the 20th century, and those kinds of things. There's lots and lots of things. She won an award for one of the best first novels from a writer, and it's a book that a lot of people have really recognized, has a lot of excellence in the way it's told, but also, they kind of get to know the characters and the story kind of grabs you and sticks with you. Now, you're going to notice some stuff about Kay Gibbons' writing almost from the very first sentence that you read. First of all, she uses what we call this colloquial language. So she writes the way people in her hometown actually talked. So you'll hear lots of informal writing and speech and things that don't seem grammatically correct. And a lot of sort of southernisms, what we call the vernacular, the way people actually talk. Heavy use of dialogue. And the main character, Ellen, has this kind of stream of consciousness where she just sort of tells you what she's thinking without necessarily putting it into straight up paragraphs or putting in any kind of punctuation. These kind of just general feelings and impressions, just kind of whatever's in her head, just kind of coming out on the page. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. It takes a little while to get used to, but I think you're going to kind of get onto this style a little bit as you read it. Now, as you meet Ellen Foster and listen to her, you may think it feels all very stream of consciousness, but if you look at what Kay Givens did, there's actually some really specific stuff that she does with this story, and some narrative techniques that she used to create this sense of this 10 or 11-year-old girl just kind of talking off the top of her head. First of all, you'll notice the whole story is in first person. So everything is told through Ellen's perspective, so it's her voice that you hear and her thoughts. There's a lot of flashbacks where the scene from the past interrupts to show something that had happened before, and also this idea of this recursive style. This novel kind of doubles back on itself and then weaves recursive. You think of like what a spiral does to kind of do these little loops. So Ellen starts in the present and then goes back to a part of the story and then jumps back here and then goes back to the middle and then goes back. So it's this sort of spiral that leads all around there. And you'll find that for the most part, these spirals jump back and forth between two different time frames at the novel. The first is the present, where we meet Ellen, and she seems to be in some sort of a new kind of environment, a new family, a new foster home. We're really not sure, but she's very happy and content there. And then these flashbacks, where she jumps back to what it was like with her biological family growing up. Now, Ellen Foster is easily the most famous book that Kay Givens has written, but she's written a lot of novels, and a few of them are listed here on the screen, as you can see. So there's some other books out there. So if you find that you really like Ellen Foster, there may be a few other things that you can think about if you're interested in reading and learning some more. Now, especially if you decide you like Ellen Foster, there is a sequel called Ellen Revisited. Actually, the novel is called The Life All Around Me. And this is where Kay Givens kind of goes to what happened to Ellen after the book. And we see her just a little bit before she's about to go off to college. So we go from this young girl in school, and then we see what happens to her a little bit later on in life. And Kay Givens has said that she really wants every decade or so to kind of write a new story to show what has happened to Ellen and these impacts from her young life on the life that she's going to be leading at this point. So as we open the book and start to get into it, there's a couple of things I want you to kind of keep in your mind as we read. First are some of these themes and issues that are going to run through the whole novel. The idea of fate versus free will. So how much of what happens in our lives is actually under our own control? And watch through the book how Ellen tries so hard to take control of these things, but there are some circumstances that just are things that she has no influence over. So watch that tension between those two. There's a lot of information about identity. How does Ellen sort of figure out who she is and who she wants to be? There's a ton of information and thoughts about family. What makes a family? What doesn't make a family? What pulls a family apart? And this true meaning of this term that we use that we call family. And finally, there's a lot of issues in here about race as well. The novel's set in the 1970s in North Carolina, so you see some of these tensions as Ellen has some friends who are African American and what their family is like and what she's been taught to think about, and kind of watch as she sort of becomes aware of what racism is and some of the ways that she herself decides to kind of take control of that particular issue and try to overcome that. And that's it for your introduction to Kay Givens and Ellen Foster. We're going to be starting the novel in class, and I'm really hoping that you will enjoy it because it's one of my favorite books to teach. And that's the end of this presentation.